This lesson is an effort to give a comprehensive analysis of the myriad psychosocial principles, issues and recovery mechanisms during emergency situations. The lesson commences with the presentation of the key concepts of psychosocial care, its components, principles, elements of psychosocial care and issues. It also highlights the various phases and processes of disaster recovery and the efforts to reach long-term recovery from disasters. Objectives of the lesson. On the completion of this lesson, you should be able to 1. Understand the basic concepts of psychosocial care. 2. Identify the various psychosocial needs and issues during emergencies. 3. Be conscious of the process of disaster recovery through psychosocial care. 4. Realize the significance of psychosocial care intervention during disaster and emergencies. Concept and meaning of psychosocial care. The word psychosocial refers to the close connection between psychological aspects of individuals, group or communities and their broader social interactions. Psychosocial is a combination of factors is accountable for psychosocial well-being of an individual, and that these factors, namely genetic, behavioral, cultural, spiritual, social and psychological and reciprocally interrelated. Psychosocial support in disasters refers to the overall interventions targeted to address an extensive range of mental health related issues that can be seen as the residue of an emergency. These interventions aid individuals, families and groups to reinstate social cohesion and infrastructure, at the same time maintaining worth and dignity of the individuals. Timely mental health care can prevent the higher level issues and control of stress and fear due to the disaster or any emergency conditions. The central aim of psychological support and care program is to bring the communities together through combined community activities. Psychosocial care should involve both emotional support as well as social support. However, social support can only come out of building the togetherness of the community. It can be said that psychosocial care is a combination of all this, emotional and social, and care should be sustainable. Psychosocial care involves dynamic partaking of community members, through which multiple factors that amplify people's sufferings and impact negatively upon their mental health status are dealt with. Psychological support and care is a structured support which impacts both the individual and the social environment in which people live, and ranges from care and support provided by caregivers, members in the family, friends, teachers, health workers and also community members. Psychosocial support generally focus on family and community based care and support during and after humanitarian crisis, and to prevent sudden short term or long term mental health disorders. Psychosocial reflects the interrelationship between individual psychological and social factors. The care considers individuals in the background of the combined influence that psychological factors and the neighboring social milieu have on their physical and mental wellness and their ability to function. Psychological first aid should be given in the emergency phase, which allows the survivors to relieve stress and also helps to have the speedy recovery from the impact of the disaster. Survivors of large scale emergencies find that their lives are affected in all its varied proportions, be it physical, psychological, social and spiritual. Psychosocial care can help people and communities cope more effectively with each stage of the ensuing adjustment period and recovery process. The implementation of psychosocial support means that survivors are more likely to be able to respond adequately to the post-disaster stresses and are less likely to develop serious mental health problems. Principles of psychosocial care. It is essentially to be aware of the principles of psychosocial care that can be helpful in understanding the concept in detail. This lesson includes 7 generally accepted principles for providing psychosocial support to the disaster survivors. These principles would serve as a guidelines to discard some of the myths predominant in this field. No one who experiences or witnesses the event is untouched by it. Under this, we understand disasters, depending on the nature and magnitude, cause enormous loss to life, property and the environment of the area. Grief, sadness, anxiety, anger are universal in such situations. Almost all the individuals who are part of this event experience such reactions. Even people who have followed the event through the television or print media would be affected by it. Some people may not on surface seem very distraught or affected, but given the space, they will share their experiences and feelings about the event. It's a myth that strong people or men in general do not need support and can manage without external help. It's not only the people who have been overwhelmed by the event, but everyone needs support. However, the degree of care required or the time span for which it is required may vary. Disaster stress and grief reactions are typical responses to an abnormal situation. Since a disaster is an unusual event beyond the coping mechanism of an individual and the survivors are not prepared to meet the disaster, hence they manifest their trauma and stress in the form of varied reactions. These are perfectly normal and most people would overcome these reactions given the right kind of psychosocial support and care is extended to them. The survivors need to be helped to understand that what they are experiencing is normal. This would ease the stress they are suffering as a result of reactions. The survivors need to understand that disasters disrupt all aspects of daily life, resulting in practical problems like finding temporary housing, food, clothing, timely and appropriate relief measures and other essential amenities. The stress of living in cramped living spaces with limited resources adds to the pressure of survivors. Disasters result in 2 types of trauma. Any disaster affected population suffers individual and joint injury. The trauma manifests itself in stress and grief reactions, while collective trauma can lead to deterioration in the social ties of survivors with each other. The loss of these natural buffers in the community need to be restored through mental health interventions such as outreach, support groups and community rebuilding program. In large scale natural disasters, collective psychological trauma is much more prevalent. Disaster mental health services must be tailored to the needs of specific communities to be served. Under this principle, the mental health and psychosocial intervention should be based on the demography and characteristics of the population, the ethnic and cultural groups in the society, the place, etc. The language of the care providers may need special consideration. Intervention must be appropriate to the phase of disaster. It is of paramount importance to recognize that survivors experience varying emotional reactions in different stages of the disaster. While in the initial period, listening, supporting, ventilation, catharsis and grief resolution are helpful. Handling frustration, anger and disillusionment becomes essential in the later phase. Psychosocial and mental health care providers should know the phase specific needs of the survivors. A phase specific need assessment should be carried out by the caregivers working in this field. Support systems are crucial for recovery. Family is the most critical support group for individuals. Attempts should be made to keep the family together and members encouraged in getting involved in each other's recovery. Out of box thinking regarding the interventions should be preferred in individual cases rather than any pre-designed intervention. For example, the concept of Mamta Griha, the innovative project which was initiated for the orphan children after Orissa cyclone in 1999. An attitude of the caregiver should be positive and supportive. The psychosocial caregivers should approach the survivors with warmth and genuine interest, along with ensuring privacy to them. Try to break the deep rooted and culturally prevailing myths and misconceptions. These should be taken care of by the caregivers very carefully with the aim to curb them appropriately without hurting the emotions of the survivors. Use of mental health labels like neurotic, counseling, psychotic, psychotherapy, etc. needs to be avoided by the caregivers, and an active community outreach approach is required to intervene successfully in disaster situations. Psychosocial care in disaster management. A training of trainers module demands. All the above principles are explained, and it reveals that the community affected by the natural calamity needs and concerns should be addressed properly, efficiently and timely. The survivors of the disaster's rights and entitlements should consider appropriately, and the support from all corners is very crucial for recovery. The psychosocial issues seen among the survivors of disasters need to be adequately addressed. The following are the major social and psychosocial issues predominantly observed among the survivors of disasters or any emergency situation: displacement of individual, unemployment, change in marital status, single parent families, orphans, disruption in the social fabric, breakdown of the traditional forms of social systems. Psychological issues among the survivors of disasters that need to be addressed are guilt feeling of fear, shock, numbness, despair, vigilance, guilty, feeling, intrusive, memory, bereavement, post traumatic stress disorders, etc. Scientific evidence regarding mental health and psychosocial support that prove most useful in emergency settings are still thin. Most research in this area is usually conducted months or years after the end of the acute emergency phase. Appropriate interventions are required to address the psychosocial care issues of the survivors of the disasters. Intervention pyramid for mental health and psychosocial support in emergencies. From the figure on intervention pyramid for mental health and psychosocial support in emergencies, you can observe that from the bottom, the basic services and securities are aimed at to support ensuring practical needs are addressed in ways that enhance well-being and not the opposite, which is community and family supports. It is about resuming existing social practices or support to new ones. The focused non-specialized supports. These are targeted programs by trained persons for specific issues. On the top of the pyramid, specialized services, complex psychological, psychiatric or social interventions. Psychosocial recovery. The main objectives of psychosocial recovery are to curtail the physical, psychological and social consequences of an emergency and to enhance the emotional, social and physical well-being of individuals, families and communities. Psychosocial recovery does not mean just returning to normalcy. This will take step by step only with the active support from the stakeholders. Recovery may last for an indefinite time, from weeks to years. The interventions need to focus on timely recovery in almost all sectors of life, which means health, livelihood, environment, etc. The intentions of psychosocial recovery processes are: diminish in the physical, psychological and social concerns of an emergency, enrich the emotional, social and physical health of individuals and communities by providing timely support. Other aspects of recovery process, example rebuilding, will no further damage individuals or their communities. It also helps to develop individual and community resilience, as it permits people to take care for themselves and others by drawing on and improving their existing capabilities, resources and networks. People and communities who can care for themselves do better than those who expect others to look after them, and who use coping strategies that have been shown to be unhelpful. Example, blaming and externalizing responsibility. Activities to heighten psychosocial recovery may include: 1. Implementing a whole of community recovery plan that is developed for the emergency, and reviewing and revising the plan as needed. Number 2. Making clear the roles, responsibilities and referral pathways for delivering psychosocial support interventions. Number 3. Assessing individuals with ongoing psychosocial difficulties and responding to meet their needs. Number 4. Monitoring and supporting service providers who may themselves be affected by the emergency. Number 5. Continuing to monitor psychosocial support needs in the affected population and provide those with continuing needs with long-term access to mental health care services. Number 6. Identifying and empowering social and community leaders. Number 7. Providing opportunities for or enabling communities to come together, giving work and rehabilitation opportunities for the victims of disaster. Number 8. Encouraging and enabling activities that promote self-help among individuals, families and communities. Number 9. Anticipating and planning to deal with reminders of the emergency, such as anniversaries, etc. Number 10. Evaluating and revising psychosocial recovery plans and arrangements. The guiding principles of disaster recovery includes: recovery emerges from hope. Belief in the process and reality of recovery is essential for struggling individuals to face and cope with their disease or disaster. Recovery is individual. Each person is ultimately in charge of their recovery, setting goals and creating a path to achieve them. Recovery occurs via many pathways. People recovering from substance abuse or mental disorders have different backgrounds and face unique challenges. As a result, the paths that people take toward recovery will vary from person to person. Healing is holistic. For long-term recovery to take root, a person must address every aspect of their life, from mental and physical health to income and housing, to seek support and maintaining medication if needed. Recovery is supported by peers and partners. Having peers that have experienced similar challenges and come through it provides a model for those in recovery to lean on. Recovery to lean on, refer to and receive support from. Recovery is supported through relationships and social network. An emotional bond with family members, friends and peers that believe in a person's ability to recover can offer the strength and determination to get through these difficult times. Recovery is culturally based and influenced. Services for improvement must consider an individual's unique cultural beliefs, values and traditions. Recovery is supported by addressing trauma. Sexual assault, domestic violence, emotional abuse and any other trauma has to be treated if recovery is to be long lasting and successful. Recovery involves individual, family and community strengths and responsibility. Each person in recovery is responsible for their own care, though families and significant others also bear a liability, especially with recovering teens or young people to support their loved ones. Communities also have a responsibility to make sure that those in recovery can live free of discrimination and have opportunities to have housing, employment and education. Recovery is based on respect. Recovering from addiction and psychiatric issues require bravery on the part of the individual. Communities and social systems that acknowledge this lessen the stigma associated with these disorders and offer people a healthier atmosphere in which they can get better. The furthermost step in the psychosocial care and recovery process is to identify that psychosocial care is essential for all of the population experiencing a disaster. It is necessary to complete intervention care model, not a limited approach to provide care and support. There is a need to understand that there are many aspects of psychosocial care. Just like an umbrella, there is a need to cover all the elements rather than focusing on giving emotional support alone. The summary of this lesson. The lesson provided a basic understanding of the psychosocial concept, principles and recovery aspects which are fundamental to the psychosocial care program. Moreover, the lesson gives a picture of the various social and psychological issues which are common and usual reactions in an abnormal event that needs to be addressed technically and with the consultation of multiple stakeholders. It is evident that there is a need for an all-inclusive approach to relief and care, of which psychological support forms an integral part, but not the only help of the people that require it. It is important to note that although it is not the only form of assistance that is needed, it is an essential and integral element that must inject from relief work to rehabilitation and reconstruction phases of the survivors of any disaster.